Okay. You're good to go, sir.
Okay, so today is January 19th, 2022, meeting of the Blighted Property Review Committee. We are starting it at 10:03 a.m. I'll make a motion to commence the meeting. Somebody wants to second that? I suppose we can do that.
Second.
Okay. So first order of business will be to approve the minutes from our meeting dated November 27th, 2021. Can I get a motion from somebody to approve those?
Don't move.
Second.
Do we have any changes or anything that anybody's aware of? No? Can I get a second?
You're muted, Jennifer.
I can't see her. Sorry,
Yeah,
Jen.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to correct Ann McDonald's name in the minutes. A-N-N-E.
Oh, it's spelled, okay. Can we
Thank
make
you,
that
Jen.
a note to correct that spelling, please? Anything else? Do we have a second to accept them with the correction?
I'll second.
Okay. So second item on our agenda, Mr. Girardi, I believe that would be for you to give us an update on the remaining residential properties.
Yes. What you have before you is you have 5 remaining residential properties in the city of Williamsport that we have on this list that we have to serve by a sheriff's notice, either locally or out of town. Originally, if you look on the list, I believe everyone has a copy of the list, but there was 3 on that list. And then the other 2 and one other one we sent out notices to, which were approved as be blighted by this board. Mr. Marty did come in and sign it. Our secretary signed it. They were sent out. I got 2 sent back to me as not received, and I had 1 that came back to me as received. At that point, that person had until yesterday to apply for a hearing in front of this board. They did not. So that last one you see on the second page, 1650 Andrews Place, will be sent through the Planning Commission Redevelopment Authority for their approval as being blighted, and then it'll be put on the second list you see below you, number 2. Those are the ones that went through everything. All we're doing is waiting for acquisition. Actually, we're waiting for funding, and then we go through the legal process and acquisition, because they all did receive their letters. Some of them did apply for a appeal, were denied. Some were applied with the appeal, the 90-day one. That person never did anything. That went back to the redevelopment authority. So everything in number 2 will no longer be seen by this board. They're off the board's, I guess, table at this point, and they're in the hands of the community development and myself to do the acquisition. And what we can do is keep you abreast of what's going on with them as the process works. Okay, so as I said, we have 5 properties now that are on that list. The 2 that were sent back to me, I have to find out if the owners are local or if they're out of state. If they're local in Lycoming County, I know how to serve them. We can do that. If those 2 are not out of state, then again, I have to go through the process of finding out where they're located, which I have, and what that process in that particular state is to get them served. Okay, so that's what I have, and we are out looking for other blighted properties. I do have 1 more that I'll be bringing to this board here next month that we found that fits the definition of blight. It's vacant and it's in bad condition and has several property maintenance violations attached to the building. So at this point, I'll hand it back to the chair or the vice chair. And if you have any questions for me, I'm more than happy to answer them.
Okay, do any members of the board have any questions for Mr. Girardi on that?
So the properties in number 1,
Mhm.
when did we vote on all those? I think it was maybe at a meeting I wasn't at. We did that within the last couple months.
The very first 3 that you see were done a long time ago. Okay, those are the ones that are out of state, that are left over, that are out of state. Okay, the last 2 and the one that I told you about that goes to the redevelopment authority, we did that at not our last meeting, but the meeting prior to that. Okay, so these all were done through this board as approved as blighted, and then
And so we just have to send letters.
these 5 we need to send by certified. We sent certified mail. They were returned as not received. So my next step is to send it by sheriff. In Lycoming
Okay.
County, I get a hold of the sheriff and they'll go out and deliver it in person. Anywhere outside of Lycoming County, I have to figure out the process is because it's different in every state and every municipality. So that's what I have to do. So yes.
Okay,
Confirmed is blighted. All I have to do is send letters, and then once they receive it, they can appeal and come back to this board. If they don't appeal within that certain period of time, then it automatically goes to the Redevelopment Authority and Planning Commission. Does that answer
Okay.
your question?
yep,
Which is, Mr. Jarari, if I'm correct, then that's the process that took place with 1650 Andrew Place, right?
That's correct.
They never did put together an appeal.
Correct. Right.
All right.
They did receive the letter and they read the letter. Nothing came back as an appeal, no letter, anything. It must be in written form to me.
I don't remember, just curious, is Andrew Place a local ownership? Do you remember? Does anybody remember? Whether it was a local owner or out of state?
I'd have to look in my actors.
No big deal. I was just wondering.
Yeah, I believe it is a local person, to be very honest.
Okay.
Mr. Nardi, what was the address?
1650 Andrews. I could pull up another screen here, I guess, and look. 1650 Andrew Place. Did Mr. Marty join us yet? No.
Not that I believe so. I do not see him up on
Okay.
the screen anywhere.
Well, I just probably now I was just going to see if he had any update from the redevelopment authority. Is Skip on?
Skip is on, yes.
Skip,
And Skip could explain to you a lot better where funding is, if we have the funding and so forth at this point.
I didn't see. Oh, there you are. Okay. Hey, Skip. Good morning.
Morning.
I know it's not our thing, but I mean, since we're on this subject and we now have properties that have gone to the redevelopment authority, any update on potential funding to do anything with them?
Well, the funding that the city council is looking at potentially for redevelopment authority / land bank hasn't been committed yet, but there has been significant discussion around a rather large amount of money being awarded for these kinds of activities. At present, we don't have it. It'll be a decision of council, and once that decision is reached, then we can start the legal process of acquiring these properties and then making decisions, redevelopment authority making decisions as to how they're going to proceed with them, whether it's demolition, whether it's renovation. I think all those things are out there, and the potential of doing an RFP for other developers to come in and either partner with the land bank redevelopment authority or doing a standalone project. But until either of those two authorities have some resources, we're kind of stuck in a limbo.
Sure. I don't know if Mr. Palizzi would have anything to add to that on the funding side, if there's anything you were privy to that could be shared.
There's nothing that I have currently that I can share. I believe at the moment I get any kind of an update, I will be sending that off to everybody.
Okay, great. Any further discussion, questions from anybody about the residential side of things?
I just was in the middle of sending out a chat message to everyone on the call, but to let you know the ownership of 1650 Andrews Place through the KGIS appears to be a Thomas McCloskey and Michelle Ulam that are claiming residence at 604 6th Ave in Williamsport.
Okay, interesting. Any further discussion on the residential side?
And just to let everybody know, we do send it to that address. They don't necessarily have to pick it up. And
Right.
That's so what'll happen is we'll send the sheriff out to that same exact address and serve them in person, and then it's delivered. Okay, but our first step is through certified mail.
Okay. I guess we can move on to item 3 here. Discussion of the commercial properties.
Yes, if you like, I'll start. And Mr. Marty is on right now at the meeting, just to let everybody know.
And
Okay,
we have Austin with us now, right?
Yes, that was the purpose. I just wanted to get into that. What I did was, we had a little discussion here in the last several meetings concerning commercial properties. What is truly a blighted commercial property? Talking with Austin, we also feel, Austin and myself, feel that the blighted ordinance needs to be tweaked and turned around a little bit to include more than just one line of commercial property. It should basically spelled out throughout the whole thing. Also, with having, I asked Austin to be here for sure, because he's the one who's been interpreting this and helping me all along with this, and I feel he's more knowledgeable of that commercial end. And I felt that our determination of vacancy and vacancy blighted needs to be addressed by Austin, so we're all on the same page. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Austin, and hopefully he can answer questions that you may have as a board. But as I was saying, is vacancy does not determine that a building is blighted. That's from my gathering what Austin said, that it needs to be vacant for a year, plus it has to have other things involved with it to be able to be considered blighted. So I'll turn it over to Austin at this point, and hopefully he'll add to what I'm trying to say. And go ahead, Austin.
Thanks, Joe. Yeah, I think you pretty much summed it up exactly what the issue is. It's just that it can't just be vacant. I mean, a property can be vacant and be in fine condition and it just doesn't have a tenant. I mean, when we're talking about commercial or residential properties. So it really just comes down to there being vacant and tax delinquent, vacant but neglected and lacks maintenance, accumulation of trash, debris. I mean, there's a list in the city's ordinances and a list in the blighted property law of all the different types of reasons why something can be found to be blighted. But, you know, just vacancy alone would not be enough. So it's really mostly either on this committee or the codes department of the city to, you know, find that one of those other conditions exists, if it does exist, for any particular property that is commercial and is a subject of discussion before the committee. But I don't think that you really, there isn't a particular set of rules that apply to commercial properties. You're really looking at them very similar to residential ones. I mean, you know, is it a fire hazard? Is it disconnected from all of its utilities, plumbing, heating, sewage, those things? But really, I can't think of anything, you know, other than the fact that it's not lived in and you have commercial tenants occupy space differently than residential ones. But all the other types of reasons of why something would be blighted are going to apply equally to a commercial property, just as in a residential one.
When Austin, you made, I think early in your remarks, you differentiated between the definition of blight in the city's code or the city's ordinance versus a larger legal definition of blight. So is vacancy defined in the city's code, or is vacancy defined, or is blight defined differently in the city's code as it is under some other rule of law? I don't.
So the blighted property law, there is a particular provision of the city's code or ordinance that defines how to decide if a property is vacant. It has to be unoccupied or its occupancy is not authorized by the owner of the property. You know, for unimproved lots or parcels, there's lien issues, or there's three different provisions under the city's code. What we're really looking at is the city's code attempts to map the state law on blighted property removal under the urban redevelopment law. So they're pretty close. I don't see, nothing sticks out to me that is inconsistent between the city's code and the state law. It's just a matter of reading the two together, and if there is any inconsistency, the city's code is only going to go so far as the state law. It can't. We really would have to fall on the state law. We try to, of course, comply with both laws, but if there is some sort of conflict or inconsistency, we would really turn to the state law to find what the maximum allowable exercise of power would be.
So I feel like this kind of came up because we had a presentation by someone about what other communities are doing that had some sort of fine situation in place, like if you were vacant for a period of time. Does anyone remember this?
That's basically what we're going to call the vacancy ordinance, different than what the Blighted Property Review Ordinance. We do not have a vacancy ordinance. Chelsea was looking into different municipalities who have them. Basically, if a building's vacant for a year, it doesn't really have many blighted issues, okay, such as, maybe there's some garbage laying around, something minor items. It's a vacant structure. That structure would get put on a list, and then they would be required to pay something to the city based off of the vacancy and the amount of the building that's vacant, okay? And that was done through Chelsea.
Yeah, and really, does the city have the legal ability to do that based on what Austin has just said about vacancy?
It's a separate issue entirely, Jen. It'd be a different part of the ordinance altogether.
Yeah, that should be a whole entire different ordinance.
Yeah, it's an entirely different ordinance. The way they presented it also to the redevelopment authority, so I heard it twice. So I think that it's resonating a little bit more for me. It would be a brand new item that wouldn't, and our committee would have nothing to do with it.
Okay, great.
It's another tool in the tool belt, to use that horrible saying that we say in local government.
So who would determine vacancy?
Well, most likely it's going to come down onto my department. I'll be very honest. Okay.
I would think so.
And me and probably Chelsea through community development. Okay. Will probably be, because I'm the enforcing body. Okay. I'm the one who has the ability to cite someone or something, where more so than community development does it. Okay. So yes, it would be determined between Chelsea and myself, and there would be a list of vacancies. We've already started. I know Mr. Nard, I was interested in looking at it. I've already started a list of vacant properties in the city that would classify under vacant and it wouldn't classify as a blighted. Okay. And there's probably about 50 of those on my list already. And that's just generally off the top of my head, the buildings, and I want to investigate them, but we have about a list of 50 at this point. But I haven't really given out to anybody because, again, Chelsea hasn't gotten to that point where we got the ordinance around to enforce anything.
I think the other point Chelsea made was it's actually, not that anyone will do this, unfortunately, but the onus is on the owner to get a permit to be vacant. And so if they don't do that, they are in violation of the ordinance, and additionally, and perhaps other penalties could apply. Mr. Nardi, I got a question. Thank you for running the meeting. I apologize for being late because I had something at my day job pop up. So Austin, can I get some clarifications then? Because there's a couple of things, you and I talked about some months ago that I just want to get kind of back on the record with a good answer. So I know that we're talking about vacancy and the fact that vacancy alone doesn't drive blight is kind of the bottom line here. But there are a couple of things that I think, one, I want to get on record we need to remedy, and that's in paragraph C3, which is that use of the word dwelling, which I think adds to some confusion between the difference between commercial and residential properties. And it's that only place where there's that real distinction. Any dwelling, which because it is dilapidated, unsanitary, unsafe, vermin infested, or lacking in facilities and equipment required by the housing code of the municipality, has been designated by the department responsible for the enforcement of the code as unfit for human habitation. And what I'm suggesting to, I guess, go back up to council is that the word dwelling be changed to structure, because that's a whole section of the ordinance that even if, vacancy was met, whether it was commercial or not commercial, I'm not sure that we could cite a commercial building that was dilapidated, unsafe, unsanitary, vermin infested, et cetera, because of the word dwelling. I think it's a problematic word. Do you agree, Mr. White?
I have a different way of looking at it, and only because when I'm looking at this article, I'm also comparing, as I sort of discussed a little bit, I'm also comparing it to the state law, and that language of the use of the word dwelling is taken directly from the urban redevelopment law. I think that it may be verbatim or very close to section of the urban redevelopment law. So I probably wouldn't suggest a change of that, only because it could create a conflict between the city's code and the urban redevelopment law. What I'm looking at though is, the effect of that section, as far as the reasons why something could be blighted if it were to fall under that section 3. I mean, that section is, to me, mostly concerned with being unfit for human habitation, and that squares with the word dwelling, because it does sort of suggest that it's intended to deal with places where people should not be living, and commercial structures are not places that people should really be living anyway, because they're for commercial tenants. But there is other sections of the city's code, for instance F, which is vacant unimproved lot, which by reason of neglect or lack of maintenance has become a place for accumulation of trash or debris, or a haven for rodents or other vermin. I think that I don't know, just sort of going off the cuff, not having researched this or anything, I would just be careful about trying to change that word. If anything, it might be better to add a particular subsection that covers other types of structures that's similar to section C, but just is a little bit different and more comprehensive. I wouldn't want to change something that is identical to the state law. I think it would be okay to have a little bit more, but I just wouldn't want to change one that is already identical to the state one.
Alternately, because I'm a redneck lawyer, not a real one, is dwelling defined? Is there a definition? Am I missing the boat there? Is there a definition of dwelling in common law that allows, a periodic, episodic part of the day is a dwelling where even if you're at work?
I think that Mr. Girardi, you can certainly chime in here, but I think that that word has a significant meaning to you, doesn't it? Because under, for instance, other sections of the city's code, I'm looking at let me see, the zoning law.
Right. And it says
dwelling means a building which is designed or used as the living quarters for one or more families or individuals.
Yeah.
So it really is, it is looking at place of residence.
Okay.
Yeah.
If you look in the Blighted Property Ordinance under C, under section 195.02, it says basically as required by the housing code, which really should be the building code, and the building code has definitions of dwellings and so forth in it. Okay, it doesn't have it necessarily in this ordinance, but it refers to a code that does have it in.
Okay.
And dwelling does particularly mean living area. You're sleeping there, you're bathing, you're eating, you're living there. 3 unrelated people are considered a family which live in a dwelling. So yes, there is a definition.
Okay. Then I would certainly recommend we switch housing code to building code to be to modernize that.
And that's what I said earlier, Pat. There's some things in here that we definitely need to change to upgrade the ordinance or add to the ordinance to make it so it reflects commercial and the updated codes that we use now, not housing codes, but building codes, that kind of thing.
Okay. If I could continue, Mr. Nardi, then I do have a question about this lack of occupancy not being solely the criteria by which you can find blight. Because in C2, there's a sentence that says any premises which because of physical condition, use, or occupancy is considered an attractive nuisance to children, including but not limited to abandoned wells, shafts, basements, excavations, and unsafe fences or structure. So even though it's stating that vacancy can't be the criteria alone by which blight's established, it does cite occupancy as a rationale then in C subparagraph 2, or am I reading that wrong?
Mr. Marty, you're talking about the state law C2.
Yes.
Just so we're all on the same page, when you're saying the state law, are you talking about this 1945 Act 385 urban redevelopment law?
It's the citation that you would use to find it is 35 PS 1712.1.
Can you say that again?
It's 35 space PS, like Pennsylvania statute, 1712.1. And the title of it is Blighted Property Removal.
I think it would be, sorry, Jen, it would be an old reference that we used when one of our first meetings is where I had the link to it, I think, but I would have trouble. If I had trouble finding the Zoom meeting, I'd definitely have trouble finding that.
Yeah, so Mr. Marty, that section C2,
Yeah.
I think that the purpose of that section is that whatever it is, whether because of condition, how it's being used, or occupancy, and I think that word's used a little bit differently there, and that could mean anything. I don't know what in particular the state was thinking when they wrote that word, but I think the goal here of that section is to determine if you're going to use it. Is it an attractive nuisance to children? So they mentioned that wells, shafts, basements, excavations, unsafe fences or structures. It's more about, look, how is it being used, or its condition, or how is it being occupied by people, and is it a nuisance or attractive nuisance to children? In which case, then it could be blighted. But I don't know that the use of the word occupancy there is intended to be sort of the other end of the vacant or vacancy as used in the other sections.
Okay.
Mr. Girardi, just a question since we're on that. Would not a unsecured vacant building be a code violation?
Yes.
Yeah. So that may be part of the point of that, Pat, is that it's a property that is obviously not being secured, and that could have easy access and cause a hazard.
Like if you knew that there was a property that children, teenagers, whatever were it's an abandoned building, and they're going in and it's a nuisance, and they're going in and causing trouble. I mean, that's the kind of thing that could be found to be blighted under that section. Whether it be a building or they have it as premises, it could be something more than that. It could just be like it says, an abandoned well. I mean, I don't know how many abandoned wells there are around Williamsport, but it's the law doesn't assume that our local area is the same as all others.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But no matter what, one of the important segments of the law is that that they do not allow any property to be certified to the redevelopment authority unless it is vacant. So vacancy is important to get the certification, but it's not in and of itself a reason to certify.
So it's all these things and vacancy.
Yes, you're going to have to.
One of these things and vacancy.
Yes.
Right.
Okay, so I guess my final question then is, knowing those answers were coming, was what do we do about the ones that we already said are blighted that now may or may not be. And I would say that many of them still could probably meet paragraph C5 where, utilities aren't connected and, or where they're rendered ineffective so that the property is no longer fit for intended use or some of these other areas. And then there may be others that are only vacant and that is their only codes problem. So what do we do now that we made this action, Mr. White?
Well, I don't believe that, and certainly correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think that no commercial property has yet been certified to the redevelopment authority as blighted.
That's correct. We,
So really,
as a board approved.
Well,
8
we voted to.
Yeah, we voted 8 that were approved. And what I did was, as soon as I started looking into it, this is when I gave you several.
finding right,
And
and
at that point, I decided not to send them in.
correct.
I can't I did not understand anything that was just said. I don't know if there was some static or something. Could you please repeat that? And may I just clarify? Again, I missed a meeting. Pat Marty, you're saying that this committee voted on properties a while ago and then we didn't do nothing, they didn't go to the redevelopment authority?
That's correct. They did not go to the redevelopment authority because of this question that was then subsequently brought up by the administration.
What was was the owner of the building notified?
If I can speak, the letters
Sure.
were not sent out, the owners were not notified. The reason being is because after looking at the ordinance, I felt there was discrepancy, some of these being vacant only, and some being vacant that have issues with the building, two distinct things. That's the reason why I gave Austin 3 examples, the worst one, the least, and the one in between. And he felt the same as I, that some were not. So that's the reason why we had this meeting. So yes, we may have approved them as blighted within the group. Okay, nothing was sent out because at this point, I believe we need to bring them back in front of this group, the ones that we determined or I determined to be blighted, so we can vote on those.
Okay, where's the list of those properties?
You guys all have them. I've given it to you a couple different times. I'm gonna have to send it out to you
I
again.
know,
You all
I know
have
it's
them.
in your minutes from like May.
Yeah, but they're not on the agenda today, right? They're not
Again,
on
they
the
aren't
agenda
because
for
we were here
today.
to talk about whether they should be on the
No.
agenda. That's why. So
All right.
I'll stop talking and let Mr. White speak if you like.
I think that the appropriate way to proceed would be for codes to look at the list of properties that had already come before the committee, determine which ones have a additional condition of blight, and bring those and only those to the committee again for further consideration. And if indeed the committee feels that both vacancy and an additional condition of blight are satisfied, vote on those, and then notice will go to those commercial property owners. They'll have an opportunity to request a hearing if they want, and if not, it can be those properties can be certified over to the redevelopment authority. Really, the due process of the whole matter kicks in once the initial decision is made by the committee. The notice goes to the property owner, and then they have an opportunity to request a hearing. So, nobody's been deprived of anything. So I don't see there being any reason why you can't continue down the path, but continue down the path only for those that actually qualify as blighted.
So what, and so Mr. White, back to my original question, then no action. Is there any additional action we need to do to remedy that vote that was taken, or we're just legally in a place where we just pretend it never happened because it's rendered moot by a future decision?
No, I think if you want to have a clear public record of what transpired, then after codes does its diligence on each property relative to the advice that's being provided to them as far as what qualifies and what doesn't qualify as blighted. If there are properties on that list that have no condition of blight, or codes does not believe there's any condition of blight, you can include within that a secondary agenda item that retracts the prior decisions for those properties that don't qualify.
We could also probably make a motion to repeal the recommendation now, with the understanding that we would review the list at a future meeting.
I probably wouldn't well, first of all, you wouldn't want to place anything on the agenda for the committee's consideration unless it's been, properly publicly noticed under the recent Sunshine Act changes that you're really not supposed to be adding things to the agenda in the middle of meetings. But, for the next agenda, I think an agenda item for both confirming blight and for retracting blight on those that didn't qualify. I think that would be appropriate, A and B items.
Great, that's a good answer. Thank you.
Makes sense.
Sounds good.
So what do we do next? Joe, I guess you should tell us because you get to decide.
Basically, we're gonna handle exactly as Austin said. What I'll do is next meeting, we'll definitely put on the original 8 to rebuff them or remove them from that list. Okay, which I believe Austin was saying. And then what we'll do is then any of those that actually meet the criteria as blighted will be brought back in front of you at the same meeting to be approved. And at that point, we'll have Mr. Marty sign those letters and then they're sent out to the owners. Am I correct, Mr. White?
Yes, you're basically, you're looking at it from the perspective of confirming which ones do qualify as blight, at least from your perspective in the codes department, having a list A of those that should continue and then list B for retractions.
Thank you.
Can I ask one more question about the ordinance while we have Mr. White here? I just want to make sure I understand it so we don't dig ourselves a hole in the future. When you look at that paragraph C5, where it has rendered ineffective so that the property is unfit for its intended use. I'm just thinking of properties that are unoccupied for a number of years and the last occupancy might have been a certain use. I'll use the example of a building that is owned and not vacant. So for illustrative purposes, it's not, one that we might consider. Let's take where Barrel 135 is now and there are apartments above it. Let's say that was vacant for many years and the plumbing was disconnected or something like that. So it was ineffective for its intended use. Is its intended use, it was before it was apartments and a restaurant years ago, it was a music store on all 4 floors. So which is its intended use? A commercial 4-story building, or is it a multi-use residential mixed use building?
That falls under zoning, Mr. Marty, and what you'll find out is that what happens is it falls back to its last original use. So if it's vacant for a year and if it was a restaurant and apartments above, that's what it must be. You can't go back any further than that under the zoning requirements. So the zoning is a stickler on that.
So its intended use is its last viable use.
Correct.
For our purposes.
Such as a school in a residential district. Okay, that's a non-conforming. You can make it a school again if you wish, but you can't go in there and make it a business. It must return back to what the original use of that zoning district was, which is residential uses.
Okay, good. Thank you. That's helpful as we move forward, I think.
Yep.
So Pat, in your example, and as it relates to the ordinance, if that building were to be vacant for 3 years, are you suggesting it would now somehow apply because it's not being used for its intended use?
No, I'm just making sure that, like, I don't know. All right. That's not a good example. Let's say a lot of the Ansel system was was cut off. So it couldn't be used as a restaurant because you can't pass code if you don't have the system that goes over the stove. Could someone then say, oh no, it's still a music store, even though it hasn't been a music store for 70 years?
Right.
I think Mr. Girardi clarified that.
Yeah, it would remain that use. And then if they wish to put in the restaurant, which was, let's say it was a restaurant, somebody went in and gutted and took all the system Ansel out. If they wish to go back in 3 years and put another restaurant in, they're permitted because it was a permitted use in that zoning district at that time.
And that's fine, but they would need to get a building permit then to do that, to get out of the condition of blight and then show progress on work as well.
Right. Basically, anybody who has a blighted condition is going to have to come back in and get a permit to renovate those works that we, or to renovate the stuff that we require them to do. So we know it's been done back to code.
Got it.
So just for my own records, what is the minutes that reflect this decision that we're going to have to eventually go back and make another action on? What minutes are those so that I can make sure I have them?
May 19th. That's where I have them. I don't.
And do they reflect a vote?
Well, that's a good question. Let's see.
I thought it was more recently, but
Yeah, I
Joe
would have-
or Joe, you
Yeah.
or Robin, I assume know when we
Yeah, I would
when the
have to
vote.
look into that. I'm more than happy to get you that information. It's just not right at my fingertips right now, but more than happy. You're looking for the vote on the commercial properties. Am I correct when we voted on those to be blighted?
Right, the one that Austin indicated that we will have future action on.
No problem. We'll get that to you. Right, at least let you know what they are.
Yeah, I guess the actual vote would have been the meeting after that.
Yeah, it's in May sometime, Mr. Nardi. We're taking a look.
Yeah. I know the list was attached to our May 19th meeting agenda.
Okay, Mr. Nardi, if there's no more discussion on that, we can move to the next item, if you like.
Any new business? It's our next item, I believe.
Under new business,
No
I
new-
did have one thing I wanted to bring up. I did receive just here no more than an hour ago, a letter from the actual Mortgage Contracting Services LLC and a phone number for the property at 2701 West 4th Street. They are taking that property over once you pay the liens off, when to redo, fix the building and sell it. That's one of the ones that I had on that list from 2701 West 4th Street that I'd have to notify them by certified mail. So I'm going to call the owner or this mortgage company and send them that letter that I sent out to the owner of the property. Okay, just wanted the board to be up to date on that. And, you know, if they wish to appeal that decision, because we've made a decision on that, they would have to notify me when writing with a letter, and I can present it to this board at their next meeting. Just wanted to give everybody an update on that.
Anything else? Anybody?
That was August 18th meeting that I have the minutes for where we did the vote on those. So if you don't have them, I'm more than happy to send it out. The subject for was approval of vacant and or blighted commercial properties. And there were the 8 properties that were sent to everybody and approved.
Thank you. Yeah, if you would resend that, I just want to keep a note of it so we remember, so that I have them to reference when we go back and we take this next action. So we'll do that at our next meeting, I assume?
Yes,
Okay, great.
you'll get this here you'll get this here sometime today.
All right. Hey, my only other item would be, thank you, Mr. White, for joining us today and giving us advice as usual. Appreciate your help.
Glad to be here anytime.
Do we need a